We just before the summer, myself from Green Transition Denmark, Erklim, and Natur og Miljø published this report called Nordic Food Transition: Low Emission Opportunities in Agriculture. And it's funded by the Nordic Council of Ministers. We had a lot of dialogue with stakeholders, with businesses. We present some of the cases that you've heard today in this report. And after a lot of dialogue and a lot of investigation, we ended up presenting 40 recommendations for transition to a more climate-friendly and sustainable agricultural production and food system in general, because along the way we realized, or we decided, that you can't just look at the primary production, you need to look at the entire value chain, and that actually is a factor in these recommendations, because some of them overlap between different aspects of the value chain. It's not silos. So I'm just going to quickly run through it, and they may pop up during the debate that we're going to have later, because well, just because it is, of course, an issue of debate how we're going to transition or change the food system to a more sustainable one, because currently it is not sustainable, as Christian also was discussing earlier today. So in the part of the value chain that's the primary production, so one aspect of improving sustainability is to increase plant-based consumption and production. And in order to increase the primary production of plant-based crops, there's still a lot that needs to be done, because, you know, farmers are not currently doing it that much. There are some front runners. Some people are really looking into this currently, but it's not large. And one reason is that we've spent decades, if not centuries, improving the livestock production, and we're just not as experienced at producing legumes. So we need to spend money, invest in researching how to farm legumes, not just, you know, choosing varieties, but also how to manage the crops, how to, like, what kinds of pest control do we need? What kind of farming equipment do we need? When do you need to harvest your crops? We can introduce legumes in crop rotation systems to increase resilience and sustainability. There are a lot of monocultured, or, you know, a lot of crop rotation systems where you just have a few 2 to 3 crops that you're rotating, and you can really improve the sustainability and lower the risk of losing money if your crop fails by diversifying your production. And introducing legumes also have added benefits in taking up nitrogen from, for example, from the air, that you can use in subsequent crops. But you also need to make sure that the whole risk of growing legumes is not put on the farmer. And you could do that maybe by, for example, drawing up contracts between the person growing the crop and the either food processing company or the retailer that are going to sell the crops afterwards. I just want to say, of course, with 40 recommendations, I'm not going to go through all of them. So this was just a few ones that I chose to prioritize from this aspect of the value chain. At the level of food industry and retail, one thing that we can do is to increase the share of locally grown ingredients in plant-based products. Because currently, if you go to the supermarket, you realize that most of the products that are available are from other countries than, for example, the Nordic countries. And actually, there's a large overlap between people that are asking for plant-based products and people that want to buy more locally produced foods. And when you buy locally produced food products, you are also decreasing the climate impact of your food consumption. There's a need to improve the collaboration through the value chain. for example, so that when a farmer grows a legume, needs to be certain that he's actually growing the product that the food industry is asking for in terms of quality, taste, texture, etc. And there are also still, as I said, we've spent decades improving livestock production. There are aspects of the supply chain that are still not quite developed. Like, for example, in Denmark and Sweden, we don't have the factory that can change legumes into protein meal that you can use for protein alternatives to meats, such as it's the protein meal that, for example, organic plant protein is using. They have to have that processed in Norway and then brought back to Denmark. And that's just one example. At the consumer level, really what I want to emphasize is that we need to make sure that there's the financial incentive to buy climate friendly food. So that means you can't have animal products being the cheapest option and healthy and climate friendly products being the most expensive option. Because then you're not going to have the average consumer actually eating more plant-based, and also you're actually punishing the climate conscious consumer financially for making the right choice. And of course you need to help people learn how to prepare foods with these new products, and that's not just consumers but also food professionals like chefs at restaurants and public kitchens. Again, we're behind. We're still taking baby steps, or not baby steps, but there's still a lot of potential to further develop, research and develop in plant-based production. We can learn from other countries that have come or that have started early, like Canada, but also we need research into how to grow these crops in our climatic conditions. And that's not just in Denmark or Sweden, but also regionally and locally, because it varies between different parts of our countries, what can be grown, what should be grown, and how do you do so. We need politicians to take responsibility and develop national action plans for how to increase plant-based production and consumption. And we need politicians to also take responsibility of fixing this market failure and make climate-friendly and healthy foods the more cheap option when you go to the supermarket. Of course, it's not just about plant-based production. It's important because changing our diet and changing and growing more plant-based crops will have a significant effect on our climate footprint, both as a consumer and as a nation and as nations. But we also need to change current practices in livestock production. And what Kajsa was just presenting is really like basically what I want to say with this slide, that we need to, for example, start feeding ruminants in natural pastures where you can use grass that we can't eat, and where you can't grow other foods, then you can actually feed it to a ruminant and they will convert it to meat, a high energy product that we can consume. We need to stop importing soy from all around the world and start feeding livestock with locally produced grass protein in the future as well, and protein crops. And then we need to start transitioning towards an agricultural production system that's in balance with our surroundings and planetary boundaries. And one part is not having these gigantic livestock production facilities, but actually diversifying agricultural production. And yeah, and just very shortly, I'm going to say we also need to look at EU policy. That's not something that I can change here now, and I'm not going to go too deeply into it because we have a seminar on Friday where we're actually looking at this topic specifically. But just briefly, I'll say that the way the cap works now doesn't work in terms of having sustainable food production, because it's basically money that we give to people that own land, and we need to start diverting it or spending this money instead for community or ecosystem services like storing carbon and moving towards more sustainable farming practices instead of just farming anything and having a plot of land. That's all for me. We have published this report. You can find it at the link provided, and we have a ton of recommendations. These 8 unique cases